when you're going through it, you feel so all alone and you feel like you're a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And when we share our message and we're vulnerable and we share that truth that we experienced, that changes lives. And I learned to be vulnerable is when I set myself free.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. We have a special edition episode today, and this is with Dr. Liz Aguirre, and why this is so important for her and why I'm so grateful that she's helped me co-host the introduction to this section of the channel. Is she's a physician speaker who has now done 2 TEDx talks, and we are going to help bring in the questions that people have been asking about how did she do it? And what are things you need to consider if you are thinking or maybe too shy to apply to do a TEDx talk? So thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Aguirre.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. And I have to say, I have gotten so many questions about this since people started hearing, okay, Liz got a TED Talk, Liz got another TED Talk, Liz got another. And I've had a lot of people reach out for questions. And so this I think will help so many people who are maybe considering it or maybe thinking, I wish I could do that and don't quite have the confidence. So let me tell you, all of you can give a TEDx talk, and all of you have something super important that somebody needs to hear. So thank you for putting this together, and yeah, I'm happy to be here.
And I have to say that is a spot that I feel I'm in, even though I do have a TEDx talk coming up, it's the trepidation of, oh my gosh, what am I doing? And being surrounded by individuals like yourself that are really living it to give it. And we will certainly ask some of those questions that I had in the beginning and to help prompt people that are in those stages as well. And the first question is, why TEDx?
It's so interesting because I listen to TED Talks and I look for messages that resonate with me. I look for like new ideas, and TEDx, what TED really stands for, is really new ideas. And I think it's so important to kind of step out of the box and not kind of go with the status quo and really challenge how we're living our lives. And I felt like the TEDx stage was my opportunity to do that because I am no longer living by the traditional ideas of what a physician should do. And it took me a very, very long time to feel comfortable being seen for what I was doing and how I was different. And so the TED stage allowed me to really be outside of the box and talk about how I view things differently. And so that's the original reason I decided to do a TED. Now, what I didn't realize is there's a process and there's a certain way that you should be applying to these. And so I learned that down the line through coaching, which we can talk about. But one thing that was very important to me is staying true to my message and who I was, and having a coach guide you for the components or what you should include. But being able to stay true to my message was important to me.
I love that. And I will certainly talk more about the coaching in a minute, but I want to hear, people are going to have ideas. And as we're watching all these TEDx talks, like, oh, there's my idea. And I've even said this to Caesar, who we'll talk about as a coach that we were both working with. And I was like, oh, someone just said it. Like, this isn't unique anymore. I've just heard it. And you're going to hear similar themes, but stay true to you. How did you decide what you wanted to share?
It's funny because so I gave my original pitch, and Caesar was like all on board for it. And then for my second pitch, he is so great. It was going to be a live interview. It wasn't an application. It was like I had to interview with 2 people live on Zoom. And so he started offering suggestions for how I should pitch it so that it was received. And like the awesome coach he is, that was all appreciated. And I was like, thank you for that. But here's the deal. This is like in my heart. This is such a vulnerable place for me. And so nobody, I don't care if there's a version or an idea that's somewhat similar, nobody will have my story. And my story was my lived experience. And so if you're thinking, oh, I don't have anything different, I want you to realize that the person who needs to hear you speak will hear you speak and hear your message in a very different way than they've ever heard it from anybody else. And that will change their lives. And that's what TEDx stages do for you. And so if you're second guessing yourself, if you're thinking, yeah, but other people have done this, stay true to who you really are and your story and what's inside of you. And there's no way there'll be another talk like yours. It's impossible.
And for anyone that's interested in specifically what Dr. Aguirre talked about, we'll have another video that explains what she dove into. And then, of course, I know your first TEDx talk is out, so we'll go ahead and link that down below, and I'll update it when your second TEDx talk hits the recording out so that everyone else can catch up with that. And when I met Caesar, I said, Caesar, has anyone passed out on your TEDx stage? But he's like, no. I'm like, can I be the first? Because I started writing and I thought, oh my gosh, when I write and I share it, I just have that vulnerability hangover that Brene Brown talks about. So how do you go from not being a speaker to taking on what a lot of us are afraid to do is I'm going to now. How did you do that?
Well, I mean, that goes back to how I got into speaking in the first place. And we can talk about that in the next segment. But what I will say for this one is I realized how much people were hurting. And when I was hurting and when I was suffering, I couldn't see that. I thought I was alone. I thought I wasn't good enough. I thought that I had to work harder and harder to succeed. And these are the things that I talk about in my TED Talk, because when you're going through it, you feel so all alone and you feel like you're a failure. Mm-hmm. And when we share our message and we're vulnerable and we share that truth that we experienced, that changes lives. And so for me, I started off with, I started the Creating Clarity podcast earlier this year. A TEDx talk wasn't even on my mind. And then it just one day was like, I should apply to a TED Talk. But before then, I started speaking in my institution. I started speaking at some conferences. Then someone would hear me and say, can you come and speak at our institution? And that's really how it started. But why it started is because I had had healing, and then it allowed me to see how much other people were suffering. And when I was in the middle of it, I couldn't see that. So I wanted to help. I wanted to allow others to, understand that they weren't alone.
That's so important. I look back, so I didn't talk about my journey for 5 years, and that 5 years was full of shame, guilt, hiding. I didn't think I was worthy enough to get paid. So I had to dissect this a lot. I worked for 5.5 months for 2 places for no pay. And I didn't advocate because I had internalized that I wasn't worthy of that. And how does that show up in your life? And through writing, I allowed myself to start to let that go. And through one of my articles that helped to bring that community that introduced me to the concept was that I wasn't broken. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one that couldn't thrive in a system that's made for robots. And I could develop the tools to create boundaries, not that you have to change your whole life so that you can create the life within whatever system, or you can leave a system and if you're in a community where you're not alone, how much better and more optimized that is for your ability to thrive and to have a sustainable life and a sustainable profession.
Yeah, I mean and there's a lot to unpack there, and I think we should revisit that later because, man, it is so true. And what you just said about, you might leave your institution or you might not. I will tell you, the last 2 times I got burned out are in my current institution, and I am still here. and I am not burned out, and I'm viewing it very differently. And so I talk about, you can keep going and you can change jobs over and over again. But if you don't change yourself and how you're operating and your lack of boundaries, then it's just going to follow you from job to job. So that is a discussion for a later point, because I do want to make sure we answer the TED questions. But all of that is important to say, because so many people are going to feel exactly what you just said.
Yep.
And that they're not good enough, and that their story is not good enough, and that their idea is not good enough. And trust me, your idea is more than good enough. And I feel like every single physician, and I've even told some this that are not planning on TED Talks, every single physician needs to have their own TED Talk.
Louder in the
Really.
back, louder in the back, louder in the back.
I
Yes.
don't believe that. Yes,
Yes.
yes, every single one. And the problem is we downplay our abilities because we have spent the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years in medicine where there are so many amazing, powerful people. And then it makes us feel small because all these people are so great. And in reality, we're great too. We just can't see it.
Yeah.
And outside of medicine, people will still look at you and say, wow, that's amazing. And we just can't see it ourselves because we're with so many amazing people.
Yeah. And this will be important to talk about when we get to the memorization aspect of your talk, because I know that has come up, is that we think, oh, if we hear our story enough, it reduces its significance, and we're like, am I even saying anything special? But you decide to do the TEDx talk. When and how did you decide to get a coach? How did that come to be?
So I'm actually in the EntreMD business school. And I had thought about it. I hadn't even pursued it. It was another one of those things of maybe one day. And Dr. Una had Cesar Cervantes, our coach, come into the group and talk about a TED Talk. And I was like, okay, universe, you keep telling me this. And there are these little things. So then I reached out to Cesar, and it was never a question. In my mind, he knew exactly what I needed to know to coach me. And when it came to paying him, I saw it as an investment. But that's how it really happened. I felt like the universe kept putting stuff in front of me and saying, when are you going to do your talk already? And so if those little flags keep coming up in front of you and popping up and you keep ignoring them, I'm telling you, they're going to keep coming until you do your TED Talk, because there's a reason. And inside of you, you should be giving a talk. And every time those little clues come up or those little suggestions, that is really just you seeing that. And you keep pushing it back and ignoring it. But you know inside that you're meant for great things, and you know inside that you have something to share. So yeah, but that's how it was. It just, these things kept flashing up, and then when Cesar came into that group, I'm like, okay, I have to do it now.
That's fascinating. And I have Cesar, he's did an interview here. So of course we'll have that in the same series on this YouTube channel. And you can also locate it on the YouTube channel to get to know Cesar, because Cesar, I don't know how I ended up in his group, but I thought it was amazing. I love what the environment he creates, so supportive. And then Cesar messaged me, and my mom was visiting, so I didn't respond right away. And I was like, I do not want to speak. I just do not. It's not something that I think sounds great. And I sat on it because the immediate gut reaction of like, no, but because my mom was here and then I needed to respond to him. I don't like to leave people without a response. I had time to just let the anxiety reduce and say, well, maybe. And so like, I don't know if I have anything to say. So I scheduled a meeting with him, got to know him. And I was like, you're so special. And I live in Houston. So I know you live in Texas, and he lives in Houston. And too many things were aligning. And I was just like, you know what, even if I never landed a TEDx talk, this will help me have more confidence in my speaking. And the community created full of physicians, which is, it's funny, right? It's like, I guess funny in the way that it's ironic, right? Because people are seeing it, and we have been silenced for so long. that it becomes a community where people really understand you and they can understand your message.
Yes.
And so I just feel so much value from that. And then how do I learn how to speak? And then how do I actually get onto a stage without passing out? And
Yeah. Let me share two things right there real quick, because you said two things that are so important. Number one, you didn't even know if you had something to say.
Yep.
Caesar is so good about that, because what I did is I went and vomited on him. This is what I stand for. This is what is meaningful to me. This is what's important to me. And he took notes and he asked questions, and he's like, what about this aspect? You want to build that out? Do you want to, and he pulls it out of you. He pulls it out of you. So even if you do not know what you want to speak about, it's okay. But here's the deal. It's not, how am I going to do this sometime? It's like, who can help me get there? Who can help me figure it out? And I think that's, again, really important, because every physician should have a TED Talk. Every one of you. So we're going to keep shouting that.
I think it's important. And when it comes to questions that I know are common and that are asked, people want to know, okay, what is it seems, I don't even know where to start. So people will be like, I don't even know where to apply. That's a question I've gotten asked a lot, and I know you've got asked. So how do you go about with applications, knowing how many you're going to apply to?
Right. So for me, it was really easy. It's going to be different for everybody. There's applying on your own and applying with help. For me, I knew I was way too busy. I was way too busy to have the time and energy to apply to sites. And so for me, it was a no-brainer. I'm going to pay them. I wrote my talk. I did all my videos. I gave them all my information. And then I paid them to submit all the applications for me. Whenever I paid Caesar, their policy was they would apply to 50 sites and then see what happens. And he guarantees a talk, and or at least he did. I did the private coaching. There's a group coaching, and so he guarantees a talk, and he applies up to 50, and if you didn't get any, then they would apply to more, right? So for me, I didn't have to figure that out. Now, so if you are giving a talk, or if you're applying for a talk and you're going to do it on your own, it's very different, because this is what people don't realize. You can be the most amazing speaker ever and not get selected if it doesn't fit the site's theme. They have different themes. And so if one site is talking about renewable energy and that's their theme, and I apply to it, I'm not going to get chosen. Or if they're talking about, like keeping things green, then I'm not going to get selected because I'm not in that theme that they're wanting. So every site has a theme. So if you're going to do this on your own, you really need to spend the time researching, figuring out who they're looking for, and then be very selective about who you apply to, because it is a long process and it does take time, and you have to search and you have to look and you have to make sure that your message is aligned with what they're hoping to accomplish with the event. So all that to say, if you're doing it on your own, be selective, do the research so make sure you're not wasting your time doing the application. And if you hire someone like Caesar, like, you have to put in the work to develop your message and your talk and create your videos that you have to submit. He had me do a 30 second, 60 second, 90-second video, because different sites want different things, and then submit that. And then the other thing to know is, don't apply to sites that are going to require more than you're wanting to give. And sometimes you don't know that. So the third talk that I got selected for, I did not end up accepting because it was in Washington. I was in Texas. They wanted me to fly there at least twice before the event. And so I was like, that's too much. And by the way, we're going to end up doing the event in 2 weeks. Definitely not. No. And so you don't want to put yourself in that situation where you're stressed and you can't show up as your best self when you're doing that. And so just be mindful of that.
This is great because I get asked, people feel like there's a scarcity of TEDx talks, which I say, no, you can wait for one that's appropriate location so that you opt. I don't like to travel. So actually before Caesar and I met for our first official mentorship conversation, I had one come up that was at Corpus Christi. It was drivable distance and it was in a short period of time, but I was like, you know what? I know myself, I have so much that I can limit myself on. So I just wanted to apply. But then we had an illness in my family. So I was like, you know what, this is going to come right around the time that that person might transition. And it's not going to be the best time for me. So I withdrew my application, but then they gave me a virtual talk, which I didn't even know was an option. And you have 6 months to record it. And I know you did a virtual talk. So
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So mine, the site, it was going to be a live event and then they had a COVID spike. So we had to transition to virtual. Was that the one that was the theme about love, the Corpus one?
yes.
Was that the theme of the event? Yes. I saw that and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to apply for that. And I was like, I can't do a fourth one. Like, oh, and here's another important thing for people to know. You cannot give the same talk twice. It has to be an original talk, an original idea. And if you already used your original idea for one site, you cannot use it for another. And so my first site that I got accepted to ended up going virtual. And so then when I got the other live site, I was like, wow, that's where I want my really powerful message to be. So I ended up rewriting my talk for the first site so that I could share both messages. And, you know, there were some overlapping themes and overlapping points, but I had to rewrite that talk so that I could do both.
Wow. And I know we keep bringing up Caesar's name and people always, I've been asked to, is it important to have a coach? In my application, actually, it was mandatory that you were working with a coach. And just from your
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
yeah, it's, I mean, you've already saying some really important stuff, but
yes. Okay. You are asking such really great questions. You are such a great interview host because that brings up another point. Different sites have different requirements. I didn't know some sites required a coach. There you go. There's one. Other sites will require you to drive and go have a live interview before they'll select. Other sites will say, congratulations, you've been accepted. And other sites will send an email and say, we have some more questions for you. So, and those are just some of the variations that I've heard, but every TEDx site, X marks the spot. A lot of people don't know this. They're like, what does the X stand for? Well, there's the big TED and they have to follow the big TED rules, but X represents the site. X marks the spot. So there's thousands of sites all over the United States and internationally, and X marks the spot, but they all might have different requirements. So just be aware of that. Yeah. And the question that you had was about coaching. For me, I knew hands down I wanted to coach because as soon as, and by the way, Caesar does give a live webinar. And again, yes, like he has been such a great coach to me that I fully endorse Caesar and the services he offers. For me, the coaching was important because I knew that TED was very different than a presentation that I would give to anybody else. And I wanted to make sure that I was conveying the message in the way that the platform needed to hear it. Anytime you do anything, it's always about your audience. It's never about you. So if you're like going into thinking, oh, I'm scared and I'm nervous and this will help you, Jillian, remember, it's never about you.
Yep.
Your message is there to help the audience and the other people there. And so I wanted a coach to be able to help me and help me understand exactly what I needed to share with the audience. And then, of course, I needed help with the applications because I had zero time for that. And so, yeah.
So I'm a researcher. That's my full-time job. I love researching, and I just to give the kind of the caveat, and I have Reese, and that's it. So I had time to do my research, and I also think I needed it because of my restrictions on where I would actually travel. And so if people want just that counterpart, is I did apply myself, but that was a limitation, and it's doable for the sites that I looked at. Of course, as you mentioned, the sites are completely different in their application, but something I didn't realize is TEDx's are all volunteer and they're all
Yeah.
different. So that's something to know, and express gratitude to the people that are hosting, because they are there because they believe in the TEDx mission, and also to share the voices of those selected. And what you said was so important too, because the speech, when I write, it's like purely, I try to make it have an impactful message for people, but it's usually like a journal or a blog that's your story and that you hope is meaningful for people to read it. But the TEDx speaking is, you can put parts of your story, but it's not meant to be your whole story. It's meant to be a
Oh,
message.
yeah. That's one of the rules. That's one of the rules. It can't be just a whole thing about you and your story. They don't want that at all. They want it to be a little bit of a mix. You can include some of your story. They want there to be some facts, and they want there to be an original idea. So you can have the story, you can have the facts, you can have the original idea. And not just have, you have to. You have to. And the original story, like, do you really have to tell your story? Can I just stick with my big idea and the facts? You could. But some of the best talks that I've ever seen are sharing a part of them that makes them completely unique from anybody's talk. And nobody will ever have a talk like yours if you're including a piece of your story. And so I really recommend that, because I think I shared with you that learning to be vulnerable was very important to me. And when I started my podcast, I literally, there you go.
What would
Brene Brown? Yes, yes.
Yep.
And it is so important, because when I learned to be vulnerable is when I set myself free. Truly. My feeling trapped and my feeling like I was stuck and I was challenged and I had no choice was because I was in hiding. I was so afraid for people to know who I really was and how I have lived my life in my past, and those kind of things. And so when I came out, I started doing it in my speaking when I saw physicians that were hurting too. And then I also had friends that were not physicians, and I could see their hurt. And I thought, there's all these people who will never hear me speak on a stage. If they don't work for an organization that hires me, or they're not in the medical community, they'll never hear me. And so that was why I started my podcast. And then eventually why I got on the TED stage was because I wanted my story to be heard. I wanted people to not struggle, and I wanted them to not feel the shame that I did for so long. And I know you can relate to this. And yeah, and so it's so important. And your story is your story, and nobody will ever have a story like yours.
Yeah, and I think this is an important time to tell them you can catch your story on our next episode together. Are there any specific questions that maybe we didn't cover?
Yes, and I jotted this down as we were talking earlier. I've been asked, how many sites did you apply to? How long did it take you to get a talk? I had been working with Caesar for about a month and a half. And he said, I don't know why your application hasn't gotten accepted yet. And he's like, it's very good. It's very strong. I don't think we should change anything yet. And I think we should wait and see. And I was like, yeah, I know why it hasn't been accepted. And he's like, why is that, Liz? And I was like, because the universe knows. The universe knows I do not have time to go give a talk, even if I got accepted. I don't have the time. So I'm gonna eliminate some things. I'm gonna offload, and I'm gonna create the space for this to happen for me. And I realize this sounds totally woo, and I am now a proud woo-woo person. The first time somebody said, ooh, that's a little woo, I'm like, retreated, felt self-conscious, felt like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. And now I'm like, like I know inside. And so Caesar kind of, he's so nice. And I was like, I know you think I'm crazy, but just watch.
Mm.
I am not kidding. It was not 2 weeks later that I got my 3 talks.
Wow.
And that's why everybody says, oh my gosh, Liz is getting all the talks, because it happened so fast. Liz got her first talk. Liz got her second talk. Liz got her third talk. And so everybody's like, oh my gosh, Liz is blowing up and getting all these talks. And so when we had our group coaching call, I was like, I'm going to tell all of you what I told Caesar. I hadn't gotten any talks because I hadn't created the space for it. When I created the space, boom, 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 one talk after another came in. And so another physician in the group got selected, or she was a finalist for 2 talks, and she sent me a message and she said, I want you to know it's because of what you said. I said, she told me that when I said the universe knows and I haven't created the space, she thought I'm also too busy and I also don't have time and I also need to change something. And she did, and she got her 2 invitations. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And then the other thing to know is my application went out to 50 sites. I only got 3 talks. So that means I heard a lot of no's, a lot of no's. And anytime I would get a no, I'd be like, nope, delete, keep going. Nope, delete, keep going. Nope, delete, keep going. I would say thank you for your consideration before I delete it, for the record. Yeah. You should do that, because remember that these people are volunteers and they're doing an event, and it's a lot of work for them to go through your application and so forth. But all that to say, do not let the no mean anything about you and your message. It might just not be what they need for their site, or they might have had more than one application that had a similar, point to make. That doesn't make yours less powerful. It just meant no for them there. And, when we go to the next segment, I'll share kind of a no that I had that turned into a yes later. And so we'll talk about that later. But all that to say, I got a lot of no's for this. And I had them apply for a lot of applications for me. So just keep showing up. Don't give up. That's my message there.
And I think when your message is so strong to you, your inner why was so powerful that I think that helps the no's. You overcome the no's. Yeah, they can sting, but you keep going because your reason and your why. That's why I think I always start off, everyone needs to know their why. If they come, I'm a coach and I am a Martha Beck Wayfinder training graduate. So when you say woo, that's all we always have this vision for yourself. And when you're open, that's when the universe will provide. And it's not that you get everything that you dream of, but if you don't dream of it, it will not happen. You cannot manifest it, and be receptive towards it. And even Brene Brown, when we talked about being vulnerable, well, when I was in shame and guilt, what I envision is I was so closed off. My relationships were suffering. I didn't let anything in. And she talks about how when you're not vulnerable, you don't just block the negative emotions, you block both the good and the bad. And I was numb and I was surviving. And when we open up our stories and we expand, and a lot of times physicians are in this scarcity mindset. And I think our world at large is at a very scarcity mindset. So we're like, oh my gosh, well, you know what? I just saw Liz get a talk. I mean, she's gotten 3 now. I mean, I can't catch up with her. I'm just not even going to apply. It's like, well, there's an abundance of talks. And as you said, your message is, no one can give the message you give. And the importance of including a story and why is to provide the audience the reason why you are the person to give that message.
Yep. And, you just made me think of something else, like the woo. The woo is just something that people don't understand. There is a space between, I guess, a faith and science, and that's considered the woo in my mind. All it is something that hasn't been proven scientifically. We can't wrap our human brain around it sometimes, and it's just like this kind of unknown, but you feel it inside of you. Like that to me is the woo. And that to me is the part to embrace, because that's where the magic happens, really.
And I'll say one last thing is before I dove into life coaching, the people around me had a lot of negative things to say about life coaching. And of course, I've heard, and you're like, oh, well, is that true? But I was in a state of extraordinary medical compromise, and I was, it's all psychospiritually empty. And I was like, okay, this is the one thing I have never ever tried before. The moment that I applied, didn't even start yet. Then I switched institutions, as you mentioned, hadn't yet developed new tools until I started coach training. I got to my new institution. I went to a burnout committee meeting. The chair said, if you have any questions, email me. I emailed him. I said, is there a place for coaching within our department? He said, matter of fact, we have it within our institution. A year ago from today, I graduated from their leadership training and my life trajectory completely changed. So believe in yourself.
Yeah.
I had to go against what everyone else was telling me. And I was, I had done my whole life according to what society told me would be the outcome of success. And when I got to that point, I was miserable. So I decided to take a different path. And of course, it's been all the difference. So we'll have a Robert Frost poem that.
Yes. And you know what? Honestly, coaching is what gave me the confidence to be seen at a bigger level. Before, I was playing it much more small and, locally. I would never put myself out there. I would never have a podcast or put myself in YouTube or any of that, like Facebook Lives, like none of that I would have done before, and coaching helped me get there. Several people have reached out to me about how to do the memorization. The memorization piece is so important. So this is what I recently heard Vikram Raya's podcast. I don't know if he's still doing it. He did a few episodes, but he talked about memorization on there, and this is where I learned this from. And I'm like, this is amazing, because I don't usually speak at memorized talks. I speak from my heart, and I have bullet points that remind me what I want to say, and then I just speak. But for this, it's very important that you do have a memorized talk, because you want to make sure you don't misspeak on the TED site, because everything has to be validated as true and correct. So if you give a stat and say, 50% of Americans are living in poverty, and that's not correct, your talk will not get published. They will say nope. So you want to make sure that you do memorize the talk. So what I did is I wrote my key points, my key words, like I would do if I were giving a presentation. Like if the key point was don't make assumptions, I would write that down. And if the next one was shift your mindset, I'd write that down. And if the next one was turning your fear into fuel, then I'd write that down. And so then I put them strategically throughout my house. And so as I was remembering my talk, I would start right here. I'll just say what I did. I started in my closet by the mirror, and my talk started there. I had the bullet point listed there. And then if I look to the right, there's a pillar here, and I had a few keywords there that led to my transition in the story. And then it jumped to my bathroom because there was a piece that was relevant to my husband, so I put it on his mirror. Oh, wow. And then there was a piece talking about lack of sleep and how that's a form of self-neglect. I put that on my nightstand next to my bed. So as I'm traveling through my house, I'm remembering that the next place in my house is my nightstand. Therefore, this is what I need to talk about at that point. And then you rehearse it so many times that you remember it.
Oh my gosh.
This is such
fascinating.
Yes, such a great memorization tool. And I'll tell you, my TED site said, don't worry if you mess up. We can edit it out before it's published. My husband, I didn't know this. My husband said one of the other very experienced speakers messed up 3 times and would joke about it. I know they're editing this, guys, so I lost my spot. I'm just going to take a water break now. And that's what she would do and joke about it. And then she'd reset and get going again. And she did that 3 times over. So it takes some of the pressure off, knowing that the site wants to have great videos that come out. So they're going to cut those things out. But, and they even ended up offering, say, hey, this new location, we can do a teleprompter with 5 bullet points if you want to do that. But I didn't have to, because I remembered the bullet point that was on my husband's mirror, the bullet point that was on my nightstand, the bullet point that was on my dresser, the bullet point above the fish tank. I remembered those. So I never had to worry about losing my place, because I knew where I was traveling in my house. And I knew that the next location after my fish tank was over by the trash can. And after the trash can, it was by the plant, representing the tall field of weeds that you talk about. And then the next place was up my stairs, because I was talking about all of us traveling a certain journey and having these experiences. So I strategically placed the points, and then I just always remembered where I was next in my house, and it made it so much easier. I didn't know this when I memorized my short little 30, 60, 90-second videos. So those were so hard, and I had to re-record to get them perfect, because I don't know how to do all the editing things. So I had to get them perfect. And doing this just allowed me to memorize it so much easier. So yeah.
Wow, that is dynamite. And that's like the most nerve-wracking thing. I used to act, and if you get your lines wrong or you miss it, when I acted, actually, it was really funny. In one play, I was a clown. This is when I was really young, and my nose fell off, and there were 2 younger actors that went to go get it for me when I was trying to tell them to not get it. And this was in like Raggedy Ann and Andy, I think is that what it is?
Oh yeah.
And so when I was focused on them, I missed my line, but somebody had to improv for me. But I just remember it was so, when I was younger, it was just, you become the actor and you embrace it and you've practiced it so many times, it just becomes part. And I remember plays from 6th grade. I still remember a lot of my lines. So it's funny how that works. And I'll remember where I was when I was practicing.
Mm-hmm. And that goes actually back to my first TED Talk, which is imagination being the key to fulfillment, and allowing ourselves to think back to when we were children, and how, we didn't let the society pressures and all of this stuff. We were just kids and we were in it. But then you throw in outside factors, which become abundant as an adult, and it'll mess you up.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. But anyway, yes, it really is, I think, a very useful technique, especially for people who are visual like me. I'm a very visual person, and I use different color of cards, posted them, and it worked great for me.
That's awesome.
You mentioned putting the link to my first talk in here, and I absolutely would appreciate you to do that. But when the next talk is released on YouTube, that talk, every single physician needs to hear.
Awesome.
That is where I am speaking to you, and I'm sharing, I think you'll find it very relatable, and that is the talk that you want to hear. So,
and
yeah.
This is an important point to make too. So let's say why we also need to share your talk with everyone that can benefit. The importance of sharing the TEDx talk when it comes up. Please share that.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, please help me. Okay, here's the deal. So some of the other speakers that I was on the stage with gave great talks. They have thousands of followers. They have networks that they've built over years. And one of them was an actress and a singer for 20 years. She has a huge following. One of them does professional speaking, like keynote speaking, big talks, has a huge following. My following has grown over the years, but it's still very small. I don't have 1,000 followers yet. And so the physician space, I really feel like we need to expand and lift each other up and help each other. Because for our messages to be heard, we have to elevate each other. And elevating one another does not take away from the opportunities. It doesn't. It's like you said, they are abundant. They are everywhere. And when you put yourself out there and you help people, it comes back to you 100-fold. It really does. And so I would appreciate that because otherwise, the Big TED, they bump it up to the top of their site when in that first week of release, there's a bunch of likes and comments, and they're like, oh, people want to hear this. But if it's not, then my talk will remain the world's best kept secret because people won't find it, people won't see it. So yes, if you could help me and if you could boost my talks, I would greatly appreciate it. And I hope that it gives other physicians the confidence to put themselves out there and share a message because we have to change the culture of medicine. We have to. This is not sustainable. And we are going to get old and we're going to need care and our parents need care and we want them getting great care right now. And if we don't start taking care of ourselves and if we don't start figuring out how to support each other and help each other and lift each other up and overcome some of the challenges that we as physicians are facing, then we're in big trouble. And that's why your voice is so important and my voice is important. And everybody who is listening, if you think for a second that it doesn't matter, I'm telling you, there is someone out there. There is another physician who needs to hear exactly what you have to say, and it can change the entire trajectory of their career. And so don't forget that. And I encourage you all to do that. And if you get any follow-up questions, I'm happy to do a part 2 or do whatever you want to be able to answer questions because I really want to see more physicians on the TED stage. I really do. And I think that we can actually change the world to TED. I think there might come a time when they're like, everybody's a physician that speaks to TED. Yep. And if you're not a physician, you can't get on the stage because they only have physicians. Well, that's not going to be true, but I think it's going to look like that because we have so much knowledge, so much experience, so much lived life that physicians are very unique and have a lot to offer.
We need to get this physician to the big TED stage. So when her video comes out, I will definitely have it in the description. I will definitely be sharing it on all of my social media platforms. And we will also encourage you to make sure you ask your questions down below. And I'll also have the link to Caesar's Facebook group so that you can start to even just get some momentum to join, see the community, and see if it's a place that you need to be. Well, thank you so much for being here, Dr. Aguirre. I appreciate you. And this is going to be such a valuable Q&A for people to reference on their own TEDx journey. And how many physicians do you think should give a TEDx? Did you say?
Every single physician has a TEDx talk in them. Every single one. I have zero doubt about that.
Well, you heard her. And we also need to make sure we try to get her to the big TED stage. So we will make sure to promote and share her talk when it comes out because that talk was for you. And we will put all the links down below. And please comment with questions we may have missed or questions that you develop along your own journey. So thank you for being here. And make sure to catch us in the next episode where Liz will be telling us all about her journey and her incredible story that prompted her to get onto that TEDx stage.